Speaking in front of a crowd can be terrifying for most people. Through this workshop, your participants will become more confident and relaxed in front of an audience. Whatever your business is, this translates into engaging and successful events. Our public speaking workshop includes in-depth information on developing an engaging program. It touches on great presentation skills and how to deliver with power and confidence. Mastering this fear and getting comfortable speaking in public will be a benefit to anyone's career.
Public Speaking, Module 1 Getting Started. Welcome to the Public Speaking Workshop. According to a survey by the Sunday Times of London, 41% of people list public speaking as their biggest fear. Forget small spaces, darkness, and spiders. Standing up in front of a crowd and talking is far more terrifying for most people. However, mastering this fear and getting comfortable speaking in public can be a great ego booster, not to mention a huge benefit to your career. This workshop will give you some valuable public speaking skills, including in-depth information on developing an engaging program and delivering your presentation with power. Module 2, Identifying Your Audience. The key to effective public speaking is preparation. The better you prepare, the more confident you will feel. Preparation begins with identifying your audience. What do you know about your audience? What do they care about? What's important to them? Do they have any misconceptions about your topic? These are the kinds of questions you should ask as part of your preparation. Sitting down and listing the questions and your answers to them will give you a basic structure for your speech, around which you can add things and take them away as you see fit. Holding the attention of an audience and speaking to what interests them is the most important thing about any public speech. It is not merely about what you say, but also how you say it. If you have a message you wish to get across, then think of how that message will communicate itself best to the audience you are speaking to. Performing a needs analysis. Preparing for a speech should begin with thinking about the wants and needs of the audience. What are they interested in? What do they care about? No matter how entertaining a speaker you are, people will not give you their full attention unless you are talking about something that is meaningful to them. You should try to let the audience know early in your speech that you are going to try to address their concerns. Too often, a speaker starts out with a lengthy discussion about the history or background of a topic. That is usually not what the audience cares about. They want to know how this topic will affect their lives. A needs analysis measures what skills employees have and what they will need. It indicates how to deliver the right training at the right time. The results answer the following questions. Number 1, where is the audience with a problem or need for change? Number 2, what tasks and subtasks does an expert perform to complete a work process? Number 3, what gaps exist between experts, average, and poor performers of a work process? Number 4, how do we translate the needs into objectives to promote a strong learning outcome? Performing a needs analysis continued. The method can be simple observation, careful note-taking, and asking questions. The question of the audience. Methods, interview key stakeholders and listen to their concerns about the problem. Define who needs help to overcome the problem. Identify and describe the audience and work. Tasks, observe the work being done by recognized experts. Take careful notes and ask questions where needed. Document the proper performance of the work tasks. Gaps, observe other workers doing the tasks, compare results with the performance of experts, document identified skill gaps. Outcome, develop a complete list of tasks for performing the work completely and correctly. Creating an audience profile. Education. If your audience is well educated, you can use fairly sophisticated vocabulary. If they're not, you need to keep things simple. Familiarity with topic. What do people know about the topic already and what do you need to explain? Familiarity with jargon. Avoid any specialized vocabulary unless you think that everyone in the audience will understand it. If you have to use a technical term, explain it. Interest in the topic. What do people care about? What's important to them? Possible misconceptions. Which incorrect ideas might you need to correct? Attitude. Are people hostile, supportive, curious, worried? The attitude of your audience will affect the tone of your speech. One of the most important elements of written or spoken language is the register in which it is delivered. Experts say that there are 3 registers of language titled R1, R2, and R3. R1 is the level of language used most commonly by politicians, lawyers, and found in the upper market range of newspapers. R2 is the most commonly used by people in everyday conversation, with acquaintances and people they have just met, outside a framework of formality. R3 is the register that may be used between close friends and is heavily based in slang. Consider how educated your audience is, and how formal you wish the speech to be will govern the choice of register. The audience's familiarity with an interest in the topic will also be of importance. You may be seeking to educate your audience on the topic at hand, or to communicate your own ideas to an audience who is already familiar with the topic. Deciding between these will help shape your speech. If they are familiar with the topic, then it does not hurt to include some jargon, as this may even make your speech that little bit more dynamic. If you don't need to keep explaining things, you can communicate ideas more effectively. The mood and opinion of your audience is also important. It will influence the tone and content of your speech, as a nervous or worried audience will require an element of comfort or reassurance, while a celebratory audience will want to share a positive electric atmosphere and probably hear some congratulations. One person speaking to a large crowd is in a unique position. They have the attention of many people and the power to get ideas across that will change mindsets and behavior on a large scale. It is therefore important to consider how you phrase things and that you correct any persistent misconceptions of which you are aware. Identifying key questions and concerns. If you have a good understanding of your audience, you can probably predict the key questions and concerns they are likely to have. You may not be able to give the audience the answers they would like to hear, but at least you should be ready to discuss the things they care about most. Many speeches these days are followed by a question and answer session, which allows the audience to raise any issues they do not feel have been fully dealt with by the original speech. But it is better for the audience if the original speech deals with those concerns, as it shows they have been thought through rather than addressed on the hoof. Predicting questions and concerns should be straightforward. If you are in a position to address a larger group of people, then the chances are that you have knowledge of the issues that affect them and how these can be addressed. It is also possible to take a sounding from people on the ground as to what is concerning them. It may well be that you share those concerns and have given some thought to addressing them. If you can speak intelligently and emotionally about the issues that concern your audience, they will have a lot more trust that you can help provide solutions to the problem and that their position is understood and respected. It may help before delivering a speech or presentation to make a list of the 5 most searching questions you expect people to have. Your presentation should then concern itself with answering those questions as well as delivering your own standpoint. When delivering the speech, it is helpful to pay tribute to the fact that these concerns exist by saying something along the lines of, "And before I go any further, I would like to raise an issue that I know has been foremost among the minds of many here." As the audience is giving you their attention, it is simply reasonable that you make clear that they, too, have yours.
Brian went to meet with Frank at lunch, and Brian asked him, "How's speechwriting going?" Frank said, "To be honest, I have no idea how to even get started." Brian nodded, understanding. "Have you performed a needs analysis?" Frank asked, "What's a needs analysis?" Brian said, "You ask yourself questions like, where is the audience with the need for change? And how do we translate those needs into objectives to promote a strong learning outcome? It's about asking yourself what your audience is looking for and starting from there." Frank said, "That might be just the jumpstart I need to get this speech started." Brian emailed Frank a document outlining the steps of a needs analysis, and Frank used the points to help write the outline of his speech.
Module 3, Creating a Basic Outline. The main advantage of creating an outline is that it helps you to organize your thoughts. The audience gets more out of a presentation when it is well organized. They also are more likely to think that the speaker knows the subject thoroughly and has given some thought on how to present it. In this module, we will be considering a hypothetical presentation about a project that has just been completed, but the general approach we will consider is applicable to just about any type of presentation. Often this approach is seen as being similar to creating a body. You start with the skeleton, the basic outline, the bare minimum of the speech, in something like the shape that it will eventually take, and progress by adding meat to the bones and layering the rest on top of that. At key points of the presentation, specific issues will need to be confronted, and by allotting them a place in the basic outline, you will be able to ensure that these are prioritized and addressed correctly. Outlining the situation. Almost every project addresses a problem, an opportunity, or both. An effective way to introduce your speech is by outlining the situation that your project addresses. This approach forces you to get to the point right away. In outlining the situation, try to avoid giving too much history or background. Most people won't care about that sort of information. If you start out by discussing something people don't care about, it will be hard to recapture their interest. Provide only the background information people will need to understand the situation. Your audience in many cases may already know the background. Covering old ground will simply lead to a "here we go again" feeling in the room. So instead of beginning with a history of the problem, the nature of the problem can be covered in a few sentences, and followed with a statement of what you as a group decided had to be done about it. It is beneficial to make reference to situations and occasions with which the audience is familiar. In doing this, you will keep their attention by recognizing that their opinions mattered and were taken into account. The introduction of a presentation is where you will often take and hold an audience's attention, or lose it for good. It is wise then to keep an introduction brief and informative and set the scene for the rest of the presentation. In an introduction, there are just a few essential elements to keep in mind. First of all, you should introduce yourself in the capacity with regards to the project. Even if everyone there knows you, it helps to explain exactly why you are delivering the presentation. You should then give a brief overview of what the presentation seeks to address. This will stop anyone in the audience from thinking, when are they going to get to the bit about X? And allow all present to concentrate on the presentation itself. Identifying the task that had to be performed. Your task description will be the organizing principle for the rest of your presentation. Most of what follows will be an account of what you did to complete the task. One way to come up with a simple, clear task description is to imagine you are writing it for a teenager. How would you describe what you did to someone who knows very little about your work? This can obviously be tweaked depending on the audience, but it is worthwhile remembering that the audience to which you speak will all have their specialties in certain fields. Something that is perfectly evident to you may not be perfectly evident to many in your audience. This does not mean that a lot of your speech should be taken up by lengthy explanations of what you do. Think of it in a similar way to film. In most films, we have periods of what the directors like to call exposition. They lay down the backstory, telling us why what we are watching had to happen. Film reviewers are very quick to criticize films which have lengthy spells of exposition, as all we really need are the essential details. We can piece the rest together for ourselves. Take the same approach to explaining the task that you are dealing with. Give the important details and assume a basic level of understanding. The result of having these brief explanations is that your wider presentation will then be set in a certain context, and it is in this context where the things you say will make sense. When you have completed the first draft of the presentation or speech, it helps to then read over it and see if it would make sense to someone who is coming to the presentation without the information that you have. Any terms which give space for confusion can then be explained a little bit better so that the audience can follow the presentation. If any remaining confusion persists, then a question and answer period can pick that up. Listing the actions you took. If a presentation contains a list of actions, it is a good idea to present the list on a slide or a flip chart. People have a hard time keeping more than 3 or 4 items straight in their head unless they see them displayed. As you go through your list in your presentation, you can point to each item on your chart or slide. This will make it easier for people to follow along. It will also help people see where you are in your presentation and how much longer it is likely to go on. It is important to do this for a number of reasons. Firstly, if people are confused as to what exactly will be dealt with and when, they are liable to lose concentration, and any key points you make in the presentation will resonate less as a result of people wondering what is next. Secondly, there will be people in your audience who, although they are keen to listen closely to the presentation, will still wonder when their particular area of interest will be dealt with. We change how we listen depending on our familiarity with the topic. Thirdly, if people are concerned about the length of the presentation, their minds will begin to wander as it passes the point where they would have hoped for it to finish. Making the audience aware of the structure of your presentation in advance may seem to some like an invitation for them to tune in and tune out as the topics suit. However, having a table of contents allows people to keep concentration. In areas where they are less informed than in others, they will listen in order to further inform themselves. In their areas of expertise, they will listen not more closely, but differently, giving themselves a chance to contribute after the presentation if necessary. A good structure does not just help the writer and deliverer of a presentation, but the audience too. It is easier to maintain concentration if one is aware of what they should be concentrating on, and this will mean that you carry the audience with you over the course of your presentation, allowing them to be better informed, reassured, and prepared at the end of your presentation than they were at the beginning. Revealing the results. Revealing the results of a project involves answering a few basic questions. Did the project achieve its goal? Were there any unexpected consequences? What's next? The first question may seem like an obvious one with an obvious answer. Simply put, either it's achieved its objective or it did not. However, any project will have stages of success and stages of failure. In deciding whether a project achieved its goal, it is important to refer back to the questions and the brief as set out in the introduction to the presentation. There was a plan to achieve something. Did it succeed? If so, did it come through on or ahead of schedule? Was any outside help required? And if it failed, did it fall some distance short or was it close enough to be termed a deferment rather than a straight failure? As for unexpected consequences, these can arise in any project. In preparation for a project, it is common to look ahead at potential problems and decide how these can be avoided or addressed. However, the best laid plans can still always run up against unforeseen problems and, for that matter, unforeseen benefits. These can change the shape of a project and lead to the redrawing of an entire brief. Often the kind of on-the-spot management that is required to handle such a situation can be the difference between success and failure. And any conclusion should deal with these circumstances, how they arose, and how they were dealt with. At the end of the presentation, it is safe to say that the audience will be better informed as to the extent of the success or failure of a plan. Their minds will then naturally turn to the matter of where things will go next. Assuming that the business itself has not been wound up, there will be follow-up work to do, and getting on with that work will be the priority. The question of what next can be answered with reference to the presentation you have just delivered. Everyone will now be clearer on the consequences of the previous months, and now is the best time to lay down the next plan.
So what did you think of the outline? Linda asked Marco. Marco said, I thought it was very dynamic. You really thought about what questions the audience would like answered, and you tried to address them. He said, the only part of the outline that might need some revision is the beginning. Linda said, what do you see that you thought needed changing? Marco replied, well, in the beginning you gave a lot of background, and it takes a while to get to the most dynamic parts of your speech. I would say keep the introduction brief in order to keep your audience's attention. Linda used Marco's feedback, and she was able to hook her audience from the very beginning of her speech.
Module 4, Organizing the Program. The key to creating a well-organized speech or presentation is to keep your audience in mind. Start with something that will capture their attention and give them a clear idea of your topic. Organize the body of your presentation in a way that will be easy for your audience to understand. Plan to review your main points briefly and then wrap things up on a positive note, perhaps giving your audience a call to action. The essential thing to remember is that you are giving your presentation for the benefit of your audience. That means that you need to organize it in a way that will make sense to them. The most important thing to keep in the forefront of your mind is that you are not making the speech for yourself, but your audience. Think of how politicians do things. When they are campaigning, they will speak to groups as diverse as different occupations, different ethnicities, and different ages. How they will speak to each changes between speeches. Then, when they are speaking to a cabinet meeting of fellow politicians, the language and the issues will be different again. Keep this in mind when giving a presentation. Making organization easy. Some thoughts on the basic parts of a presentation. Opening. Some speakers like to start a presentation with a joke. Sometimes this works. It starts on a light note and puts the audience at ease. But many people do not tell jokes well. If a presentation starts with something that doesn't work, the audience will start to question your ability as a speaker. Other ways to start include a rhetorical question, giving people a surprising statistic, or telling a brief anecdote that is related to the topic of the presentation. Body. The next two activities will address the body of a presentation. Review. Many speakers skip this step, but it can be worth including. Chances are that some members of the audience didn't get the few key points you want them to take away from the presentation. Restate these key points briefly for the sake of those who were tuned out the first time you made them. Closing. Restate the main point of your presentation. In some cases, you may want to give people a call to action. Obviously, the longer a presentation goes on, the more chances there are to lose the attention of your audience. However, making a presentation too short can leave people uninformed and dissatisfied with the body of the presentation. It is therefore essential to structure your presentation correctly, allowing enough time to give it a powerful opening which will draw listeners in, a strong middle which will hold that attention and give them all the facts, and a closing section which reinforces what they were told and gives them an idea about what action needs to be taken to back it all up. All these parts need to be present, and each needs to be weighed correctly according to the amount of time you have available to you. It may well be the case that in order to attend a presentation, people are taken away from doing their normal job. Such demands on a person's time will reflect in how they view the presentation and how much of their attention they give it. The amount of time you give to each section of a presentation will therefore be governed by how much time you have overall and how much of that time will be necessary to get all of your substantive points across. If your presentation is in danger of running over time, it will be necessary to trim it in places, beginning with any extraneous detail. Remember that most presentations will be followed up by a pickup session of sorts, where individual questions can be dealt with. The presentation itself is where larger issues are raised and answered. Organizational methods. It's important to realize that most people will be able to remember only a few key points from a presentation. Don't overwhelm the audience with facts that they will forget as soon as they walk out the door. Focus on a few key points. It is a good idea to write your key points on a flip chart or show them on a slide. That will help your audience understand how your presentation is organized. If you return to your flip chart page or slide when you move on to a new key point, the audience will be able to see where you are in your presentation. As well as this, at the close of a presentation, you can then go one by one through the key points that you have made. Making a point coherently consists of 3 steps: introduction, substance, and reinforcement. If you want the audience to leave your presentation with a certain point locked in their minds, then it is essential that you address all 3 of those steps. Whichever way you choose to organize the body of your presentation, it is important to keep the elements of it down to a manageable number. Taking one of the above as an example, we will look at how a problem-solution style of presentation can best be cut down into a few manageable steps. An organization may have any number of problems which it wishes to address. If there are, say, 15 problems that it wants to get to the bottom of, covering all of these in a presentation results in the problem that 15 of anything is a large number to remember. In order to ensure that the presentation does not result in an audience being bemused by the sheer number of problems, it is advisable, if you can, to find a category for each problem, whether it be time, manpower, finance, or another suitable category. Your intention should be to find a few category headings which can cover a few problems each. If these problems require more time, this can best be covered by a meeting where the attendees are all people who have experience in the specific field where problems exist. Any presentation will benefit from this kind of organization. One thing worth remembering is that the rule of 3 is adhered to by most people. If not consciously, then certainly subconsciously. Therefore, if you can keep concentrated discussion to around 3 headings or a maximum of 5, then you will be able to retain attention much better than if you have a numbered list which never seems to end. You can always, after all, emphasize the key points at the end of the presentation. Classifying and categorizing. Categorizing information is one way that people make sense of complex topics. A speaker can help people come to grips with complex topics by breaking them down into a few categories. If participants have trouble thinking of things to consider in a health insurance plan, you can make a few suggestions. Cost: payroll deductions, co-payments, cost of prescriptions. Coverage: hospitalization, emergency room visits, coverage when traveling, annual physicals, routine doctor visits. Choice: referral requirements, network restrictions, doctors, network restrictions, hospitals. One key benefit of doing this is that you can take a highly complicated topic and break it down into smaller areas, which benefits members of your audience who may specialize in a certain area. The areas in which they do not specialize will not be a signal to turn off, but an opportunity to learn more about that specific area, allowing a joined-up process to have greater success within the organization. The areas in which they do specialize are an opportunity for them to listen, evaluate, and potentially contribute suggestions which may benefit everyone in the future. Additionally, the introduction of smaller topic areas allows the brain to process information in more manageable chunks. Rather than trying to make sense of a topic which seems monolithic in size and importance, cutting it down into smaller pieces allows the individual to mentally breathe in between those sections. Think of it as being like a journey. If you were to travel from one tip of Africa to another in one go, you would be exhausted and unwell at the end of it. If, on the other hand, you included stopping off points and rest breaks, you will allow yourself to recover and galvanize yourself for the journey ahead. This approach applies in the healthcare example detailed above, but also in several other areas. A broader topic can be split down into more specific topics, which in themselves can potentially be split into more, even hyper-specific areas, depending upon the audience you are dealing with. It is also essential not to overdo this. By splitting down a topic repeatedly, you can end up with so many chunks that the constant changing leads to a presentation losing its momentum. A balance between overcomplication and oversimplification is essential. If you get it right in the middle, the presentation will flow naturally.
Danielle sat down with her manager, Catherine, to discuss her presentation. Catherine said, "Danielle, you kept your audience's attention. Your jokes were well timed, and you had a way of getting back to the agenda. However, the audience seemed to be moving off track." Danielle smiled. "Thanks, Catherine. I appreciate the compliment." Catherine said, "But every presentation can improve somehow, right? One thing I noticed was that your PowerPoint slides had several key points instead of just a few. I think it caused the audience some confusion." Danielle said, What do you think I should do the next time? Catherine said, remember the rule of 3. Most people can remember a few, about 3 main points. Narrow down what you think is the most important beforehand.
Module 5, Fleshing It Out. Audiences are often a little skeptical about your speaker's message, especially if the speaker is addressing a controversial issue. You can build credibility with an audience by using reliable sources of information and backing up your statements with citations to trusted authorities. You need to think about your presentation as though it was going to be written down on paper and distributed throughout the audience and their bosses. Throwaway lines which you assumed would just pass over people's heads will end up being the bits that certain people remember. So be sure to keep a close eye on what you say and how you say it. Often, people make the mistake of believing that the more they say, the better their speech is. Others, feeling that brevity is the soul of wit, keep what they say to a minimum. As with so many things, the truth lies somewhere in between, and the key to making a presentation as powerful and as well received as it can be is to say enough and make what you say mean enough. There is no point in fleshing out a presentation with extraneous detail which no one will remember, and at the same time you should avoid leaving out anything remotely important so that your message is strong, coherent, and memorable. Identifying appropriate sources. The internet supplies us with an endless stream of information, but how reliable is it? One way to evaluate reliability is to compare data from several different sources. One way to check for bias, especially with controversial topics, is to compare statements by people who have opposing views. For people who wish their words to be given attention and taken seriously, balance is of vital importance. Maintaining that balance relies on good research and not allowing your opinion to be mistaken in your mind for fact. There is so much information available for research, and your task is to separate the redundant, excess information from the important data. For example, many people use the popular online encyclopedia Wikipedia for research. This is not a bad idea. The site is filled with information which is well cross-referenced and constantly updated. In terms of freshness, online encyclopedias such as this cannot be beaten by the traditional paper-based form of encyclopedia, which in turn are incredibly inconvenient for the purposes of cross-reference. So if there is this much convenience to an online encyclopedia and so much information therein, we should be looking to use it for all of our research needs, should we not? Well, in fairness, using an online resource like Wikipedia can be a very good way to do substantial research, but it is important to make sure that any facts and figures you use from a Wikipedia article are cited and backed up by other sources. You will find the citation reference in square brackets next to the information in the article body. This links to the table of references, which can be used to find the source that the statistics or other information were drawn from. The more sources you have for information, and the more views you listen to from both sides of a debate, the better for any research that you do. Even if you disagree with the information and opinions given by a certain source, it can, after all, be used as a jumping-off point for a counter-argument. Establishing credibility. It is extremely important to be sure of your facts. If you make even one factually incorrect statement, some people will doubt everything you say. This is something that holds true wherever you are, including in some of the highest courts in the land. A lawyer will be much in demand if he or she can take one small inaccuracy in a witness's statement and turn it to the advantage of his or her client by using it to paint the witness as unreliable. In terms of a presentation, the stakes may not be as high, but all the same, it is wise to make sure that you have authority behind what you tell people. This begins with how you present yourself. It is often said that you cannot judge a book by its cover, and the truth is that it's absolutely correct. Some fine minds are to be found behind faces which appear, to many people, to suggest docility. But if you want to keep the audience's attention on what you are saying, it is advisable to appear businesslike and efficient at all times. You should be tidily dressed and should be aware at all times of what you have just said, what you are currently saying, and what you will say next. If this involves referring to flashcards on occasion, then there is no problem in doing so. Much better to have the information on hand than have it disappear from your mind. It is also worth bearing in mind the fact that the audience have not come to be told things that they already know. If they had, then any one of them could be giving the presentation. It is much better to think about things from another angle. You know what they think, so some of this presentation can be about what you think. The bits of the presentation that they remember may well be the moments when their opinions were challenged and potentially changed. Doing this will involve arguing a point and backing it up with sound reasoning, facts, and figures, and the impact it has on an audience can be genuinely impressive. You should use whatever is at your disposal to make your points in a presentation as efficiently as possible. Known statistics, testimonies from respected individuals, and documentary evidence are all extremely helpful when it comes to making your point effectively. Each person in the audience may have a different convincer. The more complete your presentation is, the more people you will convince. Unless you are preaching to the converted, do not assume that you will carry all before you with the same arguments that sounded right to you. The importance of citations. Some groups or individuals are so trusted that citing their statements can be the deciding factor in getting people to agree with you. Some examples: the Centers for Disease Control, the Congressional Budget Office, the Census Bureau, the Journal of the American Medical Association. The point that unites these groups listed above and others like them is that they are considered to be a leading authority in their specific field. When it comes to discovering information on any subject, going right to the leading authorities to find it out is always a sensible move. If you are giving a presentation, going to a leading authority in the area you wish to discuss is very wise indeed. Sometimes in a presentation, you will find that some of your listeners are skeptical and will challenge the statistics you mention. If you can mention that those statistics have come from a leading authority and cite that they are up to date as well, then you will advance your case much further. It has become common practice to begin sentences in presentations, essays, and speeches with the phrase, "Everybody knows that," or "It goes without saying that," when often this is very far from being the case. This is a rhetorical device which can be used appropriately and inappropriately. In the first case, if it is something everyone does know, then it prevents you from having to go over well-worn explanations. In many other cases, however, it may be used because the speaker has not been able to source direct proof for an assertion and simply wants their audience to accept it. After all, if everybody knows something, not many people will happily be the one to disagree. When it comes to backing your points up, it is best that you go to the experts. The more evidence you can back up a statement with, the more confidence you can have in asserting it. Furthermore, the fact that the information comes from a trusted source means that you can immediately trump skeptical listeners who wish to make your presentation seem less informed than it is.
Jordan made his way to Stevie's office and knocked on her door. When she invited him in, he said, "Hey Stevie, I was just looking over the rough draft of your presentation. I noticed that you used Wikipedia as an information source." Stevie said, "That's okay, isn't it? Their site has some excellent, vetted information." Jordan said, "Yes, it does. While the information on the website might be accurate, it's best to look for the resource that Wikipedia cited for your presentation. That way, you're using the most legitimate resource." Jordan sat down with Stevie at her computer. They found the citation reference in square brackets next to the information in the article body on the Wikipedia article. From there, they were able to use the table of references to find the exact study the article cited.
Module 6, Putting it all together. Once you've outlined your speech and lined up some solid evidence to back up your ideas, it's time to put all the pieces together. Whether you plan to write out your speech word for word or just speak from notes, you need to have a clear idea of what you want to say, the actual words, not just the ideas. It is generally recommended not to have everything you want to say written down, but rather a series of prompts. If you appear to be reading from a script, then there is less chance of you getting your point across with the power that you want it to have. Nonetheless, you should refrain from improvising too much, as there are clear disadvantages to this process, not least of them the fact that this is filled with risks, such as momentarily being lost for words. This makes you appear less competent, and people will be less likely to take you seriously. The general impression is that you should have in mind the body of what you want to say, and any additions which occur to you can always be included. Therefore, you do not have to worry about deviating from a pre-written speech, while also avoiding the dangers of having nothing to say. Writing your presentation. Most of the time, it's a bad idea to read a presentation word for word. It's boring and makes it difficult to build a rapport with the audience. Any presentation is a kind of social occasion. If you just wanted people to hear what you have to say, you could print copies of your presentation and hand them out. Effective speakers try to make a connection with their audience. Reading a speech word for word creates a barrier between the speaker and the audience and eliminates spontaneity. Your audience should feel like you're having a conversation with them, not lecturing them. If you are constantly referring to notes, this makes it impossible to maintain any kind of eye contact with your audience, and you may as well record the speech and play it to them. Speaking from notes does not have the same problems connected with it. It's simply allowed to have prompts from which to elaborate. The main benefit to making a speech is that you allow your words to come alive. Some of the most impressive speeches are made by speakers who have minimal notes and have thought long and hard about what they want to say and how they want to say it. This allows them to maintain a rapport with their audience and gives the words more resonance. Also, if you are reading from a full speech, this makes it more difficult to respond to questions which may arise in the course of your presentation. Allowing your brain to do most of the work sharpens your reaction times and gives you greater credibility. If you wish to write out any part of your speech or memorize it word for word, the best thing to do is write down what you will say in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the speech. From here, you can usually gain the confidence that you require to give the rest of your speech more freely. By this point, you will have gained the confidence of your audience, who will be happy to hear what you have to say, and you will be warmed up, making the rest of the speech far more coherent and convincing. Adding a Plan B. It is almost inevitable that at some point you will encounter unexpected problems in giving presentations. How you handle these problems will determine whether your presentation is a success or not. Some people get very flustered when something goes wrong. They may become irritated or angry. The audience picks up on this emotion and starts to form a negative impression of the speaker. Skillful speakers treat unexpected problems humorously. If their projector doesn't work or they trip over a cord, they make a joke out of it. This puts everyone at ease and starts to build a rapport with the audience. This is one element which separates comfortable public speakers from speakers who are less professional. The importance of having a Plan B is recognized by everyone who has a Plan A. The thing that many people forget about plans is that they are not always going to be carried out in the conditions for which they were planned. Things can go wrong without notice. Even if you have planned out every seemingly foreseeable eventuality, there is always the danger that, for example, the power will go off in the middle of the presentation. How you react to these problems is almost as important as the quality of your speech. Good public speakers will always be ready for the possibility of unforeseen problems. This does not mean that, should you spill something over your notes or have a momentary lapse of memory, you should launch into a stand-up comedy routine. It is much better to simply go into the speech you have planned with the awareness that you may need to fill space. One way in which people do this is to make light of the problem and, if you can think of a way to do so, make the unexpected problem into part of your Plan B. For example, and this is a very specific example, if the power should cut out during a speech on the importance of energy efficiency, you can turn this into a jumping-off point by saying, "And this is a good example of the importance of what I'm talking about. Thank you very much for that illustration." Of course, sometimes the fates will throw problems at you that are not so easily turned into a joke, but thinking on your feet will win you points. Often, it is enough simply to know that you may encounter such problems, and to have an attitude those things are in the lap of the gods. Having the confidence to turn them into something that can drive a presentation forward is the mark of a good speaker. Reviewing, editing, and rewriting. Here are some things to look for in reviewing the first draft of a presentation. Content and organization. Does the opening provide a good idea of what the presentation is about? Are the main ideas arranged in a logical order? Are opinions backed up with facts, statistics, and authorities? Language. Have you come with clear, effective statements of your main ideas? Have you eliminated jargon as much as possible? Have you used vocabulary that the audience will understand? Length. Have you devoted an appropriate amount of time to each part of your presentation? Is your entire presentation an appropriate length? Very few first drafts are good enough to be the draft. Unless you have immense clarity of thought and eerie foresight, the chances are that you will make a reference later on in your speech that either contradicts something you said before, or has a meaning that is not immediately clear to your listeners going on the basis of what you said before. The first draft of a speech is about getting all your ideas onto the page and ensuring that they are coherently presented. The further drafts will be about ensuring that the speech flows like it should and sounds like a complete document rather than a series of thoughts. Writing a speech that takes all the important factors into account first time is not impossible, but does take an inordinate period of time, and the final document can often sound like pages of research. Getting the balance right between informative content and something that will hold the attention of your audience generally requires you to revisit the speech after you have written it. You could sit to write with a reference book in front of you, checking every fact, figure, and quote before you commit it to paper. However, this approach almost always leads to a speech that has very little life in it. The best bet is to write a draft of the speech that sounds like something you would say. The latter drafts of it will then take into account the details that you have checked and any amendments you have made as a result of the read-through. It may be that in the original draft you have given more time to one section than you have to another, equally important section. By adding and subtracting elements, you will have a speech that sounds coherent and impressive. By sitting and working on a first draft that takes everything into account and has all the important facts and figures checked, you will have a speech that sounds like a research document.
Ronnie was about to leave work when he noticed that his coworker, Lawanda's light was still on in her office. He stopped by to check on her. Working late tonight? LaWanda sighed, frustrated. It's just this speech I'm trying to start writing. I want everything to be perfect, but everything I write just sounds like, your first draft? Ronnie filled in. LaWanda blinked and said, what? Ronnie said, your first draft. The most important part of the first draft is getting all your ideas onto the page, not for everything to be perfect. LaWanda smiled. Thanks, Ronnie. This speech isn't due until next month. Maybe I should go back to this in the morning after a good night's sleep.